Hi everyone, I'm Lucidity, and I can't get The Sims 4 to work on my computer. So instead, I thought, why don't I make a video? Because I have two articles this week that I read that gave me really strong emotions, and I want to discuss my feelings with people. And I hope that's why you guys are here, so you can hear me talk about it. In particular, I want to talk about this article that says that depression's not linked to a serotonin deficit. And it's not the premise of the article that I want to talk about. I actually agree for the most part, but it's the way in which the comments section engages with this information, and particularly just the way that people today, especially on the internet, engage in conversations about mental health. So if you're new here, I'm a PhD student in Japanese history. I've also taken history courses on the history of psychiatry itself. And because I have ADHD, I also have a troubled history of depression and anxiety. So I have a little bit of knowledge on this topic, not an extensive amount of knowledge, but I have researched it both academically and personally. So what I want to talk about is this study that was done right here, right? So this came across to me on Instagram. It says study finds no evidence that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, right? And then we have a major umbrella review led by researchers at the University College London has found no convincing evidence that depression is caused by low serotonin levels or reduced serotonin activity. This was published in the Molecular Psychiatry, and the study analyzed decades of research across several major fields and concluded that the long-standing chemical imbalance theory lacks scientific support. So they actually looked at several different studies that have already been done and kind of put that information together. Says this challenges the core rationale behind widespread use of antidepressants like SSRIs, which are believed to work by correcting low serotonin. The review suggests that the popularity of this theory may have contributed to the massive increase in antidepressant prescriptions despite absence of biological proof. And the findings also raise concerns about how serotonin theory may shape public perception and treatment decisions. With up to 90% of people believing depression stems from a chemical imbalance, researchers warn that this misconception can discourage recovery, optimism, and reliance on non drug treatments. And then it says, moreover, some evidence points to antidepressants possibly lowering serotonin levels over time, highlighting a need for transparency and new approaches to mental health care. The authors advocate for a shift in focus towards addressing life stressors, trauma, and social factors through therapy and lifestyle interventions rather than pharmacological solutions alone. So essentially, if you subscribe to this belief that depression is solely caused by a chemical imbalance, you're more likely to take medication and not go to therapy. Okay, so here's the thing, right? I'm usually not the one to accuse big pharma every time there's a conversation about medication. I think there's a fine line between conspiracy theories and critique of capitalism, and I think we're kind of constantly skirting along that line. Because, yes, the pharmaceutical industry and late stage capitalism is more concerned for profit over the lives of people. That's a fact. But we're also kind of going through this like anti-intellectual epidemic where people are critical of science and sometimes good medicine, including things like vaccines. And big pharma gets invoked every time this like conversation about vaccines come up as a way to convince people to not take them, and that's led to all sorts of different health problems in society today. I'm not even just talking about COVID. There's, the supposed link between vaccines and autism and children getting all sorts of diseases that should have been eradicated. And hand in hand with this anti intellectual movement is this epidemic of misinformation that the internet has caused. And it's especially bad when it comes to things like mental health, but also things like diet culture and anything basically about health. Social media has ruined with misinformation. And there are so many influencers and content creators who, with a fancy background song and just a little picture behind them, with their full chest, will give you false information. And people will believe it unquestioningly. I have this theory that all of the old boomers that will read a Facebook title of an article and just believe it without even questioning or even reading the article, I think the younger generation does that with TikTok. If someone says it with enough confidence and with like an eerie, spooky, like, "Ooh, did you know this?" kind of song playing in the background, and they're like pointing to a random photo of an article that you can't even read it because it's like blurry behind their green screen or whatever. Like people are just like, "Oh, they must be right. Like, look at them. There's an article. the song is spooky. They seem very confident about what they're saying, and full on without any additional investigation, people will believe what is being told to them. And I am not immune. I fell for false information about diet culture. And I struggled with years of disordered eating that lapsed into a full-on eating disorder for a couple of months. Because the point is not for me to give you diet advice. The point is that when you have this information all over the internet, what it leads to is people blaming themselves for their weight and not for other factors, particularly systemic factors that are leading to unhealthy patterns of eating and leading to all this weight gain in society. Diet culture is centered around shame. And what this shame does is it encourages you to buy products and contribute to capitalism, because if you're not buying Weight Watchers, which by the way, Weight Watchers is a whole, like, it's not just a diet. There are products that have numbers on them that you can buy at the store. Like all sorts of these other like diets, like keto, like all these things that are keto friendly, like it's all part of this consumerist structure that is preying off of your shame by encouraging you to buy things for your health. And another thing about this misinformation is that it's so pervasive that it goes beyond just social media. It's like even if you reset your Instagram algorithm, which I did, so that I can only get cat videos and Pokemon, you can't talk to someone for more than 10 minutes outside of the internet without them talking about their upcoming diet or what new exercise routine they're doing or something like that. I mean, especially in LA. I don't know. You tell me, if you're out living outside of LA, do people constantly talk about their bodies the way they do in LA? Because I feel like sometimes it's a lot. And even if you are a healthy weight or you're dieting and you're exercising and you're working on it, it just kind of feels like you're being judged. Like, even if you are at a healthy weight, it feels like you're constantly being judged, because if you don't have your own sales pitch for what thing you're doing, right? And for a lot of us in capitalism, we are working so many hours that there is not enough time to spend all of the rest of your waking hours at a gym. So it's so easy to say like, "Oh, I'm on this diet. I'm going to do this diet." And you feel like you have to, because you feel like you have to be in line with everybody else. Everybody else has a story about what they're doing for their health, and if you're not contributing to that, it feels like you're lazy. Even if you're not, even if you're working so many hours in a day and taking care of your family and doing whatever educational thing you're doing, like it feels like you have to also say that you're contributing to your health by doing something. And God help you if you're overweight, because if you don't have a sales pitch and you're overweight, you really are getting judged. Even if it's just a genetic thing that you can't help, or you're not even that overweight, you're actually at a healthy body, but we just have so much bad imagery of bodies all around us at any given moment that is telling us that curvy bodies are not healthy bodies, even when they definitely can be. If you look at pictures of different types of athletes, there are some really strong, healthy bodies that are just more curvy. And don't worry, I'm going to get back to this conversation about mental health, because what's happening with diet culture is 100% happening with mental health. I'm not saying laziness doesn't exist, but having a poor diet or having lack of access to exercise is not necessarily always a problem of laziness. In the US, we have way less access to healthy food when you are of low income. And I don't mean that like you're just eating fast food all the time. Like, basically, Whole Foods is locked behind a paywall. And when you go to a regular supermarket, the food has all sorts of hidden sugar and other unhealthy things that are added in without your consent. You don't even know that all your food has high fructose corn syrup, and you have no choice. And that's just the cheaper option. And when it comes to exercise, like so many American cities are built around cars and driving, and all of the jobs that are available today involve going to an office and sitting for hours and hours a day, and that's really unhealthy. But we don't have a choice. And you're not being lazy for sitting for all those hours a day, because you are working. Human beings spend hundreds, thousands of years hunting and gathering and being on our feet to get our food and to take care of ourselves. All of the food we ate were things that we grew ourselves or we shared with our community. And I'm not saying that these are the golden ages where, we were dying. The medicine was not good. We were dying. But at the same time, the way that society is built today is just not conducive to human happiness. It's conducive to profit. Profit for corporations who don't care about individual people and whether or not they're thriving. So again, I say all this because mental health misinformation is spread in exactly the same way. You can find it within toxic internet culture, but more often I find that if you talk to people in your everyday life, they will say some misinformation about mental health. And in the comment section of this article are several people with their full chest saying that the cure to depression is taking a walk outside, exercising, and having a healthier diet. As you can see, the two pillars of misinformation have converged into one misinformation sandwich. And I think this is just more judgment and more veiled criticism of people who are depressed. You're depressed because it's your fault. You need to get off your butt and you need to walk. You need to exercise. You need to eat healthy, and you're not. It's about shame. But I would like to argue that the real reason that depression rates are so high has a lot more to do with late stage capitalism than it does your individual willpower. And this is not the place nor the time to get into a full explanation of Das Kapital by Marx. The main point is that capitalism doesn't care if you're happy or healthy. They care that you make money for corporations. It's called productivity. And the more productivity that they can get out of you, the better. They do this through your labor. When you go to work happily and get your job done with a smile on your face. Capitalism doesn't want you depressed. It doesn't want you questioning it either. And with that, I would like to say something that should not be radical. But there is not one singular cause of depression. And to say that depression is just solely a chemical imbalance, I think gets it backwards. And this is where I'm going to fall on my history training, right? I have done a lot of readings on the history of psychiatry. And if there's one thing that I have learned is that we do not find medications for things by understanding the problem that we are trying to solve, right? Most medications are found on accident. A lot of the reasons why we use opioids is because people found out when they ate a plant that was an opioid that it made them feel less pain. We do not know why it did that. We just knew it did that. Then scientists find out later and figured all of that stuff out, and they kind of can understand it chemically, but it still isn't why people feel pain, right? Like physical pain comes from all sorts of different reasons. If you break your foot, it's because you broke your foot. And the medication helps block the pain so that you feel better. But we found that out through trial and error. And most of these medications are just throwing things at the problem and seeing if it helps. And when it does, we go, oh, wow, it helped this thing. I guess we have a medication for it now. And that goes to say that no one definitively knows what causes depression. There's no, saying neurotransmitters and low serotonin is what causes depression assumes that we understand what depression is enough to say what is causing it, if that makes any sense. What we do know is that the SSRIs make people feel better when they are depressed because we gave them to people and they felt better. And then we looked at what was happening in people's brains and saw that it was increasing the serotonin. So then we come to a conclusion, oh, when people have more serotonin, they feel better. And then they worked backwards and they said, okay, so serotonin deficiency causes depression. But I think that's a huge oversimplification of what depression is and why humans experience it. So I actually agree with this article. And I agree with a lot of other scholars that I've read that said that the reduction of serotonin in the brain is a result of depression, not the cause of it. Let me explain. When you are depressed, your serotonin drops. Not the reverse. Not your serotonin dropping makes you feel depressed. when you are experiencing depression, the serotonin in your brain drops. So I am not saying to not take your SSRIs. I'm saying that you're understanding them probably a little bit wrong. I don't think that the medication is curing your depression. I think it's helping. I think it's a tool. I think it's like Band-Aids. Band-Aids stop bleeding. They don't stop you from falling down and skinning your knees and bleeding in the first place. For me, I think emotional pain is like physical pain. I think it's trying to tell you something. It's saying something's wrong. Please tend to this. You need to fix it. Or like say you broke a bone in your foot. That would hurt immensely. And you would feel it. And then you would stop and say, my foot hurts. I feel like I should stop walking on it. But what if your foot hurts and you say, oh, let me take Advil and that will stop the pain. And then I could ignore my foot hurting, right? But if you broke a bone, your broken bone is still broken, even if you don't feel the pain anymore. So if you were to keep on walking on it, and then when you feel the pain again, you just take more medicine, and then you keep walking on it, and you're gonna hurt your foot even more. You possibly might, like, your bones are gonna heal all funny. You might break them again because they're not, like, properly aligned. I don't know how to explain it. But I'm saying you're not solving the issue of the broken bone by not feeling the pain. But also, if you're in a lot of pain, you can't properly solve the problem of your foot. So if you didn't take the medicine and you're just sit there screaming, you're also not helping. So what we usually do is if you were to break a bone in your foot, you would take medicine so that it doesn't hurt, but then you would also go to the doctor, get an x-ray, find out your foot is broken, and then have surgery or whatever you have to do, like get a cast, and you would heal your foot. So SSRIs help when you are depressed and you can't get out of bed and you can't do anything and you can't take care of yourself. You can take the medication because it will help you get to a point where you can go to therapy and actually work on solving the underlying issue that is causing your depression. But this is where I agree with the article. I think that the problem with SSRIs is that the pharmaceutical company would rather you not fix the underlying problem and continue to buy more SSRIs and think that you have to keep taking them for the rest of your life. Because curing your depression is not profitable. And this is not everybody. There are some people with conditions that are purely just, for whatever reason, your brain is not giving you the neurotransmitters that you need and it has nothing to do with anything else. And in that case, maybe you do need to take medication for the rest of your life. This is for there is so many cases of depression today. Like, it is massive amount of people that not everybody is experiencing that. And I think the reason why depression is so pervasive today is because of capitalism. Because if we stopped relying on the medication to make us feel happy, we would look around at our lives and realize all the things making us unhappy are things that capitalism needs to survive. Like you going to work with a smile on your face, getting paid very, very little to do a job that you do not like for much longer than you would like to do it. And if you figured out why you were depressed and that it had more to do with your environment than it had to do with your brain, you would ask for better working conditions and you would ask for a pay raise and you would ask for less time at work so that you can spend more time doing things you love in life and go on vacation or spend time with your family. But no, they're not going to say that. They're going to say, no, it's not your employer. It's your brain chemistry. Just take 10 milligrams of Lexapro and come back to work tomorrow, Linda. Like, just get back in the office, put a smile on your face. It's a willpower issue. You're just lazy. You don't like working. Nobody wants to work anymore. So no, not all depression is caused by capitalism. But capitalism does cause a lot of the things that make us depressed. So here's my opinion. I think depression is caused by extreme stress. Sometimes that's grief. Sometimes that's trauma. Sometimes it's because you have a chronic illness. Sometimes it's because you have a disability. Sometimes it's caused by things like the way in which capitalism doesn't allow us to spend our time with community, doing things that are creative, caring for our friends and family. Human beings are not meant to be doing a 9-to-5 job 40 hours a week in any field, even if it's a job you love, at any age, anywhere in the world. And the reason we do have to live our lives in this way is because society set itself up so that employers can get you to work as much as they possibly can while paying you absolutely little, because that's how they maximize their profits. So, can we all agree that zoos are bad? And I don't mean like the conservations. I don't mean the ones that rehabilitate animals, or the ones that look at species that are close to extinction and try to help them, repopulate. I'm talking about the zoos that are poorly run. They have really small spaces, and they like take a gorilla out of its natural habitat and stick it in a cage with little to nothing to do. If you've seen a gorilla in one of those cages, they're depressed. They're unhappy. They're listless in a corner, right? And if we just told the gorilla that it wasn't working hard enough, we would be crazy. Animals in zoos need stimulation. They need things to do, and we're sort of artificially giving them bouncy balls, hoping like, "Oh, well, this will make them feel slightly better," and then they feel like a little better, and then they go back into their cage and they're like still not that happy because they're supposed to be out in nature in a vast area full of other animals that are just like them, living life in the way that they're supposed to. Again, what I'm saying is capitalism is like a zoo that cares more about making money for guests that come into the park and look at the animals like they're in a 24/7 Truman Project, not for the animals and their well-being. And good conservations care about the animals and their well-being, not profit. So in the end, humans are gorillas. Your 9 to 5 is a cage, and there's a very good chance that if you are depressed, it's because you're working a job that you do not like, you're still somehow in debt, you can't find a life partner, because dating culture is terrible in 2025, and you have zero time to work on your creative project that you've been putting off, because you just keep getting more projects at work that you don't want to do, but you have to, because if you get a promotion, then like maybe you can finally make more money, and if you make more money and you have more vacation time, then maybe you can actually like use that time to work on your projects, but like maybe you just need to retire early, and you still have to find time within your day to diet, to exercise, to find a life partner, and you don't have any of the time to do that because you're working. Diet and exercise can only cure your depression if the sole reason you are depressed is because of poor diet and exercise. That is it. And I'm not saying not to, eat healthy or to not exercise. Actually, exercise, yes, that is 100% great. Um, but it's not the only thing that causes depression, and if it is for you, then I'm glad that you solved it. But each individual person will have different reasons for why they are depressed, and again, it's not always because life is really terrible in the system that we're in. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's because you're neurodivergent and you didn't find out until your 30s, and now you know why everybody hates you all the time. Sometimes it's because your parents were abusive growing up and you didn't even realize it until a therapist spoke to you. But you need to go to a therapist because you need to figure it out. And if you just take the medication on its own, you're kind of going to feel just artificially happy until it no longer works, or you make it worse because you've been walking on your broken foot, just taking Advil, and you never went to the doctor to find out that you needed surgery. And right now, people can skip going to a therapist and just walk into a psychiatrist's office and say a list of symptoms that they have and just be given medication without ever checking to find out other reasons for why they may be depressed. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have the medication, but there has to be some sort of way to tell people, like, okay, you need to do both. And one of the reasons why this topic is really important to me is, as a neurodivergent woman who didn't like, I confirmed my ADHD diagnosis when I was 30. I am now going to be getting formally diagnosed with autism at the age of 36. And I didn't realize that a lot of the reasons I struggled with anxiety and depression in my 20s and in high school was because I was neurodivergent. And I think leaning on assumptions that depression and anxiety are caused by neurotransmitter imbalances kind of hinders your ability to figure out all these other reasons that may be causing the depression and anxiety, my brain experiences the world differently, and I get really overwhelmed, and my emotions are intense. And those are things that can be easily pathologized as you're a woman and you're irrational and emotional, and it's your fault because you can't just control your emotions, and your depression must be just because let's like take medication for your anxiety and depression because this is just like things that women struggle with. And I spent a lot of my time dealing with shame and blaming myself and thinking I was just too weak, and why are other people not struggling but I am. And as it turns out, I just experience the world differently than other people do because of the way that my brain is. And when I was on a medication for like 7 years, the medicine kept me just happy enough to keep masking and pushing through without solving the underlying issues that I was going through. And ultimately, I think that just delayed my ability to get better. So again, I'm not saying that if you're bleeding to not use a Band-Aid, but I am saying that if your foot is broken, you should probably get that checked out. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to say anything about this topic, feel free to, discuss with me in the comment section. More than happy. I obviously don't know everything about every topic that I want to talk about, and I would love to engage in dialogue about this subject or any other related subject that you may want to bring up, especially if we have facts and articles and things that you want to throw in there. I'd love to read them and know more. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.